In this video, I'll go through some of the basic steps to install a .NET web application on your server. For this example, I'll be using a trial version of the JITbit.NET Forum software, as it is a good representative example of what it takes to deploy an existing .NET application to your server. First, I'll need to install Microsoft SQL Server Express Edition to use as the database server for this application. This is a compact version of the full Microsoft SQL Server that is designed for smaller applications and development. You can find a link to download that software in the resources section below this video. Once it is finished installing, you can click Close to exit the installer. Next, I'll need to download the JITbit.NET Forum software from their website. I've provided a link to that software in the resources section below this video as well. Feel free to download that software and follow along if you'd like. However, you won't be able to use JITbit.NET Forum as your web application for the lab assignment, as I'd like you to demonstrate you can install a web application independently. Once I've downloaded the software, I can extract the zip file into my Downloads directory. When you open that directory, you'll see a file that is very obviously the README for this application. In general, many applications will provide installation instructions either via their website or as part of the downloaded software. After all, if customers aren't able to install your software, they're not very likely to use it either. However, that doesn't mean that the installation instructions are always good, nor will they exactly fit your needs either. So, you'll need to learn how to read the instructions and adapt them to fit your situation. In this case, I'm going to install this software on top of the existing website example.local that I created in the last video. So, I'll adapt these instructions just a bit to fit that setup. First, I'll need to copy all of these files to the folder I created for that setup, which is stored in C, inetpub, example. You'll notice that when you do so, it will overwrite the file named web.config, so we'll have to deal with that a bit later. Finally, I'll also need to delete the index.html file that I created earlier. Next, I'll need to convert the existing website to an application in CIS Manager. To do that, right-click the example website in CIS Manager and choose Add Application. There, you'll give the application an alias, which I will choose Forum, as well as the physical path to the files for the application. Again, C, inetpub, example. In addition, you'll need to choose the application pool. Since this application is using .NET 4.0, I can just use the default app pool here. When you click OK, you should see your application appear in the menu to the left. I'll also need to confirm that the website itself is configured to use the same application pool. To do so, I can click the website in the list on the left, then click Basic Settings in the list on the far right, and change the application pool to Default App Pool. Once you've created your application, you'll need to change some file permissions. The official guide from JITbit recommends that you change the user identity used by your application pool and then assign that account the permissions needed. So, to do that, I'll click on the Application Pools option on the left side of CIS Manager, and then right-click the Default App Pool and choose Advanced Settings. In that window, I'll scroll down to find the Identity option and change the identity to Network Service. Click OK to save that setting. Once that is done, I'll fully restart my CIS server to make sure the changes take effect. I can do so by right-clicking the server name in the list on the left and choosing Stop. Then I can right-click it again and choose Start. Now, navigate to where you stored the files for .NET Forum and give the network service account full control of the files in the App Data folder. This will allow your web application to store files in that folder. Lastly, you'll need to configure the database connection. That information can be found in the web.config file in your application's directory. The instructions give a variety of options for configuring the database, but in general, we can just use the default option to use SQL Server Express. To test your application, clear the cache in your web browser once again, and then navigate to example.local. You should see the application load with the title Acme Forum on the page. In my experience, the first couple of times I load it, it gives an error, but I hit refresh and eventually it will load correctly. To test the application, you can log in with the default credentials listed in the instructions. Once you've logged in, you can create a new forum. If everything is working correctly, it should allow you to do this without any problems. However, you should hopefully have noticed that it is no longer redirected to HTTPS when you load the website. Did you notice? When we created that URL redirect, it stored those settings in the web.config file that was previously located in this folder, but we overwrote it when we copied these files in. So you'll have to go through CIS Manager to set that up again. Once you do so, you should clear your cache and test it once again. Hopefully this time it should redirect properly. If you'd like, you can also review the contents of the web.config file in the Web Applications directory to see the additional information added to that file by the URL rewrite module. That should do it. You've now configured and deployed your first .NET web application in IIS. This example shows some of the details that you may have to deal with when deploying a web application in IIS, but each application is different. In short, you'll always have to read the documentation carefully, but use your own knowledge and experience to adapt the instructions to match your own server's configuration. In addition, don't be afraid to search for additional information on the internet. All of those resources will help you complete your task.